Hello, everyone. Today we'll be talking about evidence for evolution. So, just like anything in science, we need to make observations and use evidence in order to prove that something's correct. And so, we're going to do the same thing today with evolution and talk about what specific pieces of evidence there are. So, uh, living things have been evolving on Earth for millions and millions of years, and because of that, we can see stuff over time. We can see it in a few different ways. We can see it in homologous structures, meaning anatomical structures that are very similar to one another. The fossil record, which is paleontology, so we can see in bones that we dig up how they are similar to extinct species and species that are still living today. Similarities in their biochemistry or the molecular level, so how their DNA actually is compared to other organisms, both extinct and living. Geographical distribution, or biogeography, so where on Earth are they found? Like, were they found in the northern hemisphere? Were they found in the southern hemisphere? Were they found in the ocean? Were they found in the desert? That kind of thing. And then finally, similarities in their early development, or embryology, so how they look as they are being formed into the adults, or even just baby creatures. So we'll go one by one. Homologous body structures, or anatomy. This is bones in animals that have similar form, but they might differ in function. So in a previous lecture, we talked about how humans have 5 fingers, and we use those 5 fingers to grab stuff, to write, to do all sorts of different tasks. But in bats, they were extended so that they could fly, and then in whales, they were flattened out so that they could be used in a flipper. But these are all homologous structures. They're all the same bones. They've just been slightly modified based on what function they needed to do for their environment. Scientists have noticed specifically in vertebrates, so backboned animals, they had similar bone structures. So here's the 5 digits kind of thing. Humans on the left, we have our 5 fingers used to grab stuff, used to write. You can be very particular with it. Cats, they still have 5, but it is more to like climb and claw things. A whale has really long, flat ones, used as a flipper around it, and a bat has really long, skinny ones that help it to fly. So they're still all the same bones. There's still this kind of brownish color in every organism here. These are homologous structures. This is our first strong evidence that all 4-limbed animals with backbones came from a common ancestor. So something must have happened early on. There must have been some kind of organism that had 4 limbs, 4 arms or legs, that caused all these other ones to split off into humans, into whales, into cats, into dogs, into bats, anything that could have 4 appendages. So this helps the scientists group animals just into similarities. So here it is again. You got turtle, alligator, birds, and mammals. They're all have similar these types of bones, and we think it all kind of came from an ancient lobed fin fish. So we have all those bones there in matching colors. We have the orange one, which probably would have turned into these up here. The purple ones, which are different sizes here and there. The yellow ones in the middle. Red ones look like it might be a new one. And we got some blue, which could have come from the green one. Then we have vestigial structures. These are structures that are no longer used in animals. So they're there, but they don't really have a purpose, and we think that is evidence for evolution as well. So 2 examples in humans are appendix. We don't know much about it. We don't think it does a whole lot. And it's just kind of there. We think it might have come from it's just left in our bodies from a common ancestor. And tailbone's another one that is a spot where, had we been another animal, where a tail would have come out of. So we have this bone right above our bottoms, and that is where a tail would have come if we were a different organism. Some skinks have little legs that don't really help them much. They're really more like snakes. They just have these tiny little legs left over. And then a big one that we see a lot is whales have hips and they have leg bones inside, but they're inside. They don't really do anything in near their tails. So these are vestigial structures that are no longer used, but could show from previous common ancestors. So there's that skink. It slithers like a snake, but it does have these tiny little legs. We think that's something that is kind of a middle ground in between a snake and like a lizard. So those were homologous. Now we have analogous. This is kind of the reverse. So homologous was where they were similar bones or similar structures, but they had different functions. Analogous now is when they are different structures and stuff. They're not related, but they have similar functions. So a common one for this is like wings. So eagle wings and beetle wings, they both have wings and they both enable them to fly, but they are very different structures. Beetles made out of, some kind of like protein, those wings, whereas eagles are made out of feathers and bones and muscle, much different from one another. So analogous, they are not related, but they need to do similar things. They both need to fly, or they both need to swim, or whatever it is they need to do. They are similar in function, but not in their structure. They're not related very closely. All right, so that was all a lot for the first part of evidence of evolution. Now we're moving on to the second, and this is our fossil record, or paleontology. We can see over the years in the ground when we find different fossils, different bones, different organisms, and what they kind of looked like based on their bone structure. And we can see that over time because more and more dirt and sand and rock got on top of all of these organisms as they died. And so it's layer by layer, and we see a nice little time frame going through it. So here's some. We got these kind of arthropod looking things here. Here's the bones of some kind of 5-digit animal. We have this monster skull, and then we could have this full like T-Rex dinosaur looking one, which is kind of wild to find all those things. And so we don't find every fossil. We don't. There's still tons in the ground. Some have been eroded too much, and we can't figure them out. And so this is gaps in our evidence. So by itself, the fossil record isn't that great a thing. That's why we got to use all these different types of evidence all put together. Also, some ancient species remain unchanged, like this horseshoe crab. Those have been around and pretty much identical for many thousands, if not millions of years. But other things like mammals or birds hadn't been around all that long. So talking about some traits, we have derived traits. This is something that is newly evolved, so something that is recent in terms of evolutionary time. And then there's ancestral trait, which is primitive or really old and appears long, long time ago. So a good example of a derived feature in mammals is the hair. No other animal besides mammals have hair, and so that's a pretty new one. It happened, only a few thousand years ago rather than millions of years ago. So that's derived. Then ancestral features, these are the older ones. That would be like the lungs in mammals. So that was already there in term because amphibians and reptiles have lungs as well. And so that was already there. So ancestral, longer, older. So if we looked at this little picture here for our fossil record, 1 mean at the top, 7 mean at the bottom. If we're studying fossils in this cross section of rocks, which layers of rocks would the oldest leaf and fish fossils be? Way we look at this is we look at whichever one's near the bottom. So the one that has the leaves furthest down would be 6, and the one that has the fish furthest down would be 7. So your answer would be D. So just like a puzzle, we can't do it with just one piece. We need more information. We've done the homologous structures, and now we've done fossil record, but we got to get some more evidence. This is the most accurate way to determine if these species are related. This is the molecular biochemistry of it, looking at the actual DNA of the organisms. And so basically, the more DNA bases or the more amino acids that you have in common, or the two organisms have in common, the closer they are related. So, like a gorilla and a chimp would be very, very similar in their DNA. They'd probably only have a few letters that are different, an A instead of a T, or a C instead of a G, or a T instead of a G, whatever. Just some differences. But if we compared like a gorilla to a fish, there'd be a lot more differences, hundreds or thousands of, or maybe even millions of differences in the DNA. So here's a question you might see. They saw some amino acids for hemoglobin in 5 species, and they compared it to that of a human. And we recorded the number of differences. So based on this data, which one's closely related to human? So we look at the number of differences, and the one with the least number of differences from a human is gorilla. There's only one difference for this hemoglobin protein amino acids chain. And so a gorilla would be our most closely related species in this list. All right, moving on. Embryonic development or embryology. This is just when the babies are developing before, like that would be us in the womb, or chickens in an egg, or so either in an egg or in a womb. The embryonic structures tend to look very similar at first, and then they start to spread out and change. And since they all look similar at first, this suggests that vertebrates evolved from a shared ancestor. So here's our human fetus. This is about 5 weeks into, this is you and me at about 5 weeks old. Not birth, but in your mom's womb. 5 weeks, looks something like this. And so we look at this chick embryo on the left in pink, and it is very, very similar. It's still got that same shape, and we both have postanal tails. We both have pharyngeal pouches. Similar patterns to produce the tissues and organs. Very similar. So you just start seeing lots of similarities, like this lamprey type of fish. We got a turtle, we got a chicken, we got a cat, and a human being. We all look very, very similar as we start developing. So here's 2 embryos. One's a cat, one's a human. Take a second, take your guess about which one you think is which. Okay, so top one is the cat, bottom one is a human. Pretty darn similar, can't really tell from there. And yet when these grow up and are fully developed, they are very, very different, obviously.